My name is Eric Browning. I'm the building official for community planning and development in the city and county of Denver. Christy, go ahead.
My name is Christy Collins. I am a member of Eric's team working on various sustainability initiatives that we have going on. Erica.
Oh, thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. I'm Erica DeLello, and I'm a project manager for Noresco. I'll pass it to you, John.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is John Arndt. I'm with Noresco. I'm a mechanical engineer working with Erica and the team on advancing the commercial building standards.
I am Robbie Schwartz of Built Tank Inc. I am working on the Noresco team, helping the city of Denver with the residential energy code adoption.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to remind everyone today, this is the third and final working group meeting to talk about energy code and green code energy content. And we will be talking about both residential and commercial energy content today because this is a combined third meeting. So with that being said, I think we were going to talk for just a minute about our 2030 zero net energy trajectory. And then we'll move into some more conversation and discussion. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over for a description of where we currently stand.
John, if you want to go first on the commercial side.
Oh, great. Yeah, so on the commercial side, we've developed several proposals for the green code, as well as advancing ICC. We're looking at trying to align our performance targets with the net zero energy implementation plan by building type. The more precise evaluation of the proposals against those targets is still underway, but we believe that the current proposals should be on track for those targets. So did we want to go in with individual proposals now, or how did we want to structure this?
I think for now we'll pass it over to Robbie to give an update on the residential side, and then we'll dive into the mural board.
Okay.
Yeah, on the residential side, the trajectory goal is really being measured by an ERI score. So in 2021, the goal is a ERI score of 50 without PV and 40 with PV. 2024, it would go down to 45 without PV, and 0 is the current goal with PV. And then the 2027 and 2030 goals continue to be the same there. We've done a little bit of modeling of the base 2021 IACC to get an idea of where that is hitting with the ERI score. And depending on house size and other things, it's in the range of 55 to 66. So we have some work to do with proposals, and we have proposals that we're reviewing that should be able to get us to that 50 ERI score moving forward there.
And before we jump into the mural board, I just want to take 2 minutes to revisit why we're here today, because this is our third and final meeting. And from here, we're going to be taking proposals forward for consideration by committees, right? So our goal today is to get enough guidance from this working group so that we can focus our attention on developing the right proposals. So we understand the priorities and the opportunities and the barriers that exist that we can remove, and what it will take to remove those in 2021, to empower us as a team to develop the right proposals so that when we go to the committee, the proposals don't all get killed, but they actually have a chance of being supported. So we're looking for that feedback. We've heard a lot about barriers, and that's good because we have to identify and understand barriers to be able to take them down. But we also want to talk today about those barriers and then how we can overcome them that's really the focus. We want to focus on knowing what the key barriers are and which ones we can get past in 2021 versus which ones maybe this group doesn't think we can get past in 2021, because that's going to kind of foretell what's to come in future conversations and what may be able to be moved forward for adoption at the end of the year. So the goal of this work is not abstract. You know, we've set this metric goal of getting to zero net energy built outcomes by 2030, and that feels a little abstract, but that's a bigger goal. I mean, that's a goal that sits within a bigger goal of you know, essentially giving Denver a community, giving the Denver community a future, a longer future, and being part of solving this global problem related to energy. So we're asking everybody today to just take a step back and keep that bigger context in mind, knowing that we're pushing into uncomfortable territory with some of the energy code amendment proposals, and to just factor that into the bigger equation so that we can really talk about what level of discomfort is actually doable, maybe not easy, maybe not familiar, but achievable through thought and care, because that's what we're going to have to forward to be able to stay on track with the community's goals. And if in the process we get more amendment proposals and we talk about specific amendment proposals, that's great too. That's welcome too. But right now we recognize that we don't have time to go through every proposal in the weeds with this group. So we're looking for that bigger guidance related to the opportunities and the priorities and the barriers that we can overcome so that we as a team can make a decision about which proposals to fully develop and bring forward to the committee.
Thank you very much, Christy. Just a quick housekeeping note. Everyone is welcome to participate. We encourage you to do so. If you're not speaking, we would ask that you just put your computer or your phone on mute just to reduce any background noise. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce the mural board for today. And I'll turn it over, I think, to Erica from here.
Great, thanks, Eric and Christy. Yep, so I just posted a link to the mural board. If you all could click on that, and I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Give you a little recap of how to use it. But so you should be entering into this screen here, and we'll be starting with this question. And just to give you a little overview, you can drag and drop stars for placement for this question. And then for the others, you can double click in here to add Post-it notes and with your comments. If you wouldn't mind adding your name or initials to kind of touch on your Post-it note, that would be great. So we can have an ongoing conversation. And I'd ask that you don't delete anyone else's Post-its or stars or anything as we go through this. So to start us off, we'll look at this question. Over the past 2 working groups, these are the major barriers that we've heard. Place a star next to the barrier you see as the largest to achieving Denver's goals. And then you can see to the right here, there's the option to add other large barriers that we may have missed. So I'll give you all a second to drag and drop. And I did split it up by residential and commercial or both. So any input here is appreciated.
And we definitely encourage everyone to jump into the mural board and participate. If for some reason you're having trouble doing so, or if there's any other comments you'd like to offer, feel free to do that in the chat here in the Zoom meeting, or just speak up through the audio. All participation is welcome.
Okay, I see a lot of stars in first costs. And I guess I'd ask, has there been any shift that you've seen in your workflows where we're not only looking at first costs, we're looking at that life cycle cost? And I guess are we, we've got stars for all three, both residential and commercial. Is PV the main concern, or are there other areas that we've highlighted here that really stick out to you?
Erica, I'll just say on the first cost that project teams right now are getting different, like significantly different costs in months, right? Like from DD to CD. So, life cycle cost is kind of really hard and doesn't apply as much when they can't even figure out what the building's going to cost in 6 months. So I think that's a huge issue just with all projects right now. I don't think it necessarily hurts Denver's goals, but it's just something that's happening in the market.
I'd like to jump in there as well as with regards to first cost, because I'm curious if people have ideas of what the city might be able to do to resolve that barrier, because first costs aren't being driven largely by code change. There's a little bit of first cost issues with code change, but there are bigger barriers there that I'm not sure the code can address. So I was curious if anybody had thoughts about that and what the code, what the city, I guess, could do. I maybe jumped 2 questions ahead.
Right, so like our goal here is to identify these barriers, if there are additional barriers, and then how we can address them. So this is time for feedback from you all, so that we can kind of figure out which proposals might have more difficulty moving through the code hearings, and how we can maybe set ourselves up for success in pushing those through with consideration of these barriers.
With regards to renewables in California, we've seen a steady decrease in costs, and certainly the module cost is only a small fraction of the total installed cost. So, having the labor force in place to provide quality installations at a reasonable fee is going to be part of it. And we found that, at least in California, that the net present value of the project would be positive over its life cycle, so it would have a return on investment, but that's certainly a long payback compared to some other types of measures.
And maybe to try to instigate some ideas on how we could address the first cost issue, I would ask, what's driving that? Why are the first costs higher? I mean, I've got some ideas on from my past experience on when first costs were actually tied to what was being added to a building versus when those first costs could have been eliminated or would be reduced over time. I don't want to float out my solutions. We really need to partner with everybody in this room to talk about what is driving those higher first costs, because then that's what we have to address to drive them down, right? So can you give us some thoughts on what's driving that?
Yeah, or are there examples of, besides renewables, are there other technologies that work well from an efficiency standpoint, but are not implemented due to high first costs or installed costs?
I feel like I'd like to offer $1 million to the first person who speaks. I really like, we would really, really, really welcome a dialogue. This is meant to be a conversation. This isn't meant to be formal or a presentation or the city telling everybody the answers. We really need the conversation. Or, I mean, it's really hard to track towards the goals that the community's setting if we don't get the input.
And
This is Daniel. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Daniel Kraus. So just from hearing some stuff from last sessions, does everyone here agree that when there's regulation that forces manufacturers toward certain products because a specific market will only allow those products, look, they make the costs involved more, the process more efficient and the cost comes down? Or is that not always the case, and to what extent? Because it's kind of chicken egg thing that we keep coming back to is, we could regulate that, the process or the product needs to change, even though it's more expensive today. That might be actually a reason for the cost to come, for the companies to figure out a way to make that cost come down. But at the same time, you don't want to push that too hard because it can have that negative effect immediately. So what's the right balance is what I want to hear.
Well, with efficiency in general, in my experience, a first fundamental thing, there have to be sufficient products on the market, and such that you're not, favoring one manufacturer over all others. And with regards to some products, there will be a pretty direct relationship between, introduction of code and reduction of the product costs or installed costs, especially as it becomes more commonplace. With something like photovoltaics or PV panels, as I mentioned, the module cost is something like on the order of magnitude 20 to 25, maybe as much as 30% of the system cost, but there's a lot of other labor and soft costs with that. And since the panels are manufactured, a wide variety of places, there may not be, a direct impact from code itself on cost, but simply the fact that you have a learning curve and that the cost of the systems was decreasing over time. One thing related to PV, I wanted to float out to see what the group thought. It's an emerging thing, is for photovoltaic panels, where you have a lot of potential excess production in the near the noon hour, where it may not align with the demands of the buildings. Does it make sense to have a storage requirement, a battery storage requirement, to mitigate or limit the exported energy during those times to the grid? Does anyone have any comments on battery storage?
I'm gonna just note that battery storage ends up opening the door to not only additional costs for the battery storage itself, but depending upon the system, a fair bit of square footage out of the building, as well as potentially ventilation issues, depending on the battery types. And then there's the complexity associated with the environmental aspect of, are the batteries actually environmentally friendly over their full lifespan?
Yeah, those are good questions. I think embodied energy is a whole other aspect to consider. What's being looked at in California is have battery storage requirements basically for a 2-hour window around the peak, to production to limit energy use. And we found that the battery costs, while expensive, are coming down in price pretty precipitously. But wanted to just get the sense what the groups thought there was, if you have a lot of renewables coming onto the grid at one point.
And just to provide clarity, Robbie, the point is to reduce the inefficiency of transferring that on and off the grid.
Right. It's to it's to reduce the inefficiency and so that the building can use that stored energy when it needs it, basically during the peak times. So the storage that we've looked at in California, it's not used, although you could, it's not used as a resilience factor, but it's used to help align the building's loads and demands with the production.
Great. Thanks, John. Sorry, I thought
Yeah.
Robbie was talking to that, but that was you. So
Oh,
sorry about that.
sorry.
So-
Yeah, someone to comment?
Christy, I think to your question about why the first costs are sometimes higher, I think if we're thinking of like high performance heat pumps or just heat pumps and electrification in general, that a lot of times the equipment is more expensive and it's an all electric building that's more cost effective. But if you just go piece by piece, it's less cost effective. It's that gas infrastructure piece that is so important. And then for sometimes why we see the higher costs, some of it is risk premium. You have contractors who apply a risk premium because this is something new and they know it's going to take them longer to learn it. They know that there's more likely to be mistakes that they're going to have to come back and fix. And so they add extra cost into their bid to make sure that they're covering the costs to learn new technologies. And quite frankly, there's also sometimes the I don't want to do it premium. You see sometimes contractors are resistant to doing something that they haven't done before. And so they put a premium on the project so that if they get it, they make a lot of money on it to do something that they don't want to do. And in a time when the labor market is tight, like it is now, when contractors have plenty of work, they have much less motivation to do the kinds of projects that are going to be a headache for them. And so they are more likely to add a premium above and beyond just the simple risk premium. So, as we think of those barriers, thinking of how to bring labor costs, labor market transition costs down through the incentive program, if there is an incentive program, I think makes a lot of sense. That if there are incentives available through the city, tying those incentives to a training program, putting out the expected costs of doing projects so that it's harder for contractors to offload I don't want to do it costs onto the customer, or to, and maybe even to reduce some of the risk premium costs, so that the market can see what it should be costing relative to maybe the bids that they're seeing.
That all makes sense. Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah,
this is Nate with Studio Compultiva. I want to add on to the risks thing and extend it to the owners as well. We do affordable housing projects with housing authorities throughout the area, and they're always driven by their maintenance program. And if their maintenance staff doesn't know any how to maintain an all electric building, then they don't even consider it. There's a big lag. I think I want to just second the people that were noting education on the board here. Education at all levels is pretty key for these.
Yeah, and I just want to add a few notes on to those comments on costs as well. So I think, life cycle cost to some owners is really important, but the majority of developers, right, aren't gonna own that building for a long time, so they really don't care. But they'll do whatever they need to do to meet code, right? And they'll figure it out. Cost-wise, I think right now there's just so much volatility in the market for cost for just like basic things like wood, and steel, that it's just adding risk. And so people are just concerned about doing anything else that could add risk to their cost. So I think that's just part of the market right now, but I don't think, like, the life cycle thing, to me, we've been battling for so long, and then Denver, right, you just made it code and then no complaints. Okay, what do we have to do to meet code? So I don't think that's as big of an issue as just the market's kind of crazy right now. So people are trying to adjust to that.
Okay.
Well, and to echo Taylor's comments, I think, you know, when the code moved, all of a sudden people got more creative and said, okay, if we did something like energy recovery, if we've got an electric building, how much would that save in PV? And that was a huge, you know, aha. Oh, energy recovery is actually the lowest hanging fruit, or evaporative cooling, or different things like that. So I think, you know, because you moved code, it is moving the industry. It's just we had a pandemic in the middle of this, which, you know, doesn't happen very often, luckily.
You also
Yeah,
have to
so then the
keep it-
question becomes, how far can we move the code without hindering that? How far can we push the market to respond, you know, versus having dismay because we moved the code too far?
Well, I think you can move the code, but you need to make sure that everybody understands what's involved with that. We're just starting to figure out with charging stations for vehicles, the requirements there, and the added cost. We're just starting to get a good grip on that. So the more you can do to, you know, just demystify these things, the better.
So this,
Yeah.
Daniel, speaking of demystifying, how much effect on cost? I know it's a soft cost, it's not a huge portion of the cost, the design cost, but how much of the cost might be affected by the regulation, which right now is pretty complex. There's lots of options, but it's pretty much, you know, it's pretty weedy, and you have to really clarify to the jurisdiction what you're doing. And, you know, there's a lot of design expertise going into that, at least on the commercial side. Maybe residential is a little bit less, but how much would it benefit the design community and the bottom line if that were very much simplified? Because that's really in our power to do potentially. I don't know if, you know, I don't know how to balance reaching the goals and simplification, but the simplification is totally something that could be looked at. Would it have a bottom line effect and allow the code to push things forward in terms of efficient, you know, envelope and efficient systems, but less effort would have to go into the documentation, less effort into the kind of figuring out this with so many options and things like that?
Well, I can answer a little bit on the residential side. The idea on the residential side is to try and simplify things and move towards a simplified prescriptive path that would be based largely on the R value table, and a single performance path that would be based off of an ERI score. So the question kind of comes with regards to the trajectory, with regards to cost, I think, because, you know, do you set a goal for the 2021 that is steep, or do you spread that trajectory out to reach the same 2030 goal? Because it seems like offering education isn't moving the needle, but changing the code is moving the needle, and people are learning because the code has changed. So my kind of question is, should the trajectory be extended, or should it be shortened to meet the ultimate 2030 goal? And would people support one or the other?
Well, I can speak to experience that we had on a project where the building had an excellent energy recovery system, and we installed it about 10 years ago, and it was amazing. And then the maintenance company was changed, and the new maintenance company did not know how to operate the system, and it got out of whack. And rather than getting additional training and figuring out what it was that they were supposed to be doing, or even going back to the previous company, they eventually just turned it off and spent all that money and didn't recover the energy, didn't reduce their energy bills, had no benefit coming out of it at the end of the day. It was the easier path for them at that point. So not having the understanding of how to operate the systems is absolutely fundamental in them being effective. If you can't run it the way it's intended, whether it's commercial or residential, it's not going to make any difference, because they can make it work for the initial sign off of occupancy for the building, but long term it's not going to last.
I see that point, but the question still in my mind is, how does code impact the education? If requirements are made and people have to do X, Y, and Z, does that push education faster, or extending the trajectory and slowly phasing things in? Does that make a better environment for the education that's needed so that that situation you just described doesn't happen again?
I think doing it more slowly gives the companies time to catch up. Personally, I think that varies widely, however, depending on the complexity of the system. So for residential, I think that would be more effective, just because it's a fewer number of system types that would be utilized. Commercially, you can do anything from ice storage to energy recovery to, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways of approaching it. And again, the contractors and the maintenance staff and all the people associated aren't necessarily going to be able to keep up as quickly if it's a steep learning curve. Everybody can't go and get the training all the first year, is I guess the way that I would put that. So I would prefer it personally to be a slower ramp up.
Thank you.
I guess one question related to the training also would be, typically for any of us, when we receive training, if we don't go and use the thing that we received training on, then it fades out of our brain pretty quickly. So it would seem to me that having training available for these things needs to be an ongoing resource. And there might be a trickle of people who come in and require it because initially we're in the ramp up stage, so there aren't that many buildings being built that are pursuing any of the specific technologies. There are a lot of different things that training would be required on. And then over time, those technologies will become more abundantly utilized on buildings, and we'll have more people who need to know how to maintain and operate them. And so the training might be utilized more. It feels like it's like the training has to come first and be there and be available without being fully utilized. But I welcome other opinions on that.
This is Shanti here at NREL. I might add that the benchmarking programs that exist, right, that's their primary purpose, right, is to go through and look at those buildings that need to be upgraded or retrocommissioned or retrained. And as minimum requirements are set and percent savings are expected going forward, oftentimes those programs are directly going after those opportunities as well. It's not just new code kind of, right, as a lever here for those ongoing issues.
Christy, I think you're absolutely right with the educational piece. Like they are going to be, let's say, underutilized initially and hopefully utilized greatly long term. And I think maybe doing something, like documenting those early on trainings, and we don't necessarily have to recreate them as more people get on board, but maybe we could tailor them, or as new technology comes out or new standards come out, then yeah, we could, redo those trainings. But if we're documenting them correctly, we should be able to reuse them. So even if day one only one user signs on, that same training should be able to be used down the road when 100 people sign on to use it.
Right. So related to training sort of indirectly, one of the things with HVAC is we find is with some federal preemption and with the state of things as they are, there's already, for the most part, most control options and features that you would want to specify are already required by code. So to really make a big dent into the heating, cooling, energy use, you need to look at alternative systems, either dedicated outside air systems or BRF or ice storage, as it was mentioned. And, how does the group feel that those, what are the best ways to support use of those systems where applicable without making too much of a burden on the testing, commissioning, and maintenance staff? Because I've done enough field work to know that there are a lot of inconsistencies with the quality of the installations.
John, are you, this is Shanti at Enron, are you saying like cold climate heat pumps are going to be, that they'll work and that we don't need backup electrical heat and we need to convince, we need the technologies to do that? And are they ready for code? Is that in Colorado?
Well, I don't know that they are actually, but that raises another question. I guess I was mentioning like as opposed to a standard rooftop unit, you can put in a higher efficiency unit, but as far as requiring high performance, in some cases you might go to a different system option, wanting to provide support for either training or verification or diagnostics and monitoring to verify that those systems are operating as intended. The cold climate heat pump is actually a good topic because I don't know, what is the group's barometer on the readiness of heat pumps in Colorado, given that the standard conventional heat pump starts to lose its efficiency as well as capacity in low outside air temperatures, and given Denver's climate, especially multifamily where they might have to operate in the evening hours where temperatures are 0 degrees, 10 degrees. What is the group's feel for the capabilities of heat pumps to accommodate that? In California, we're looking at having the option to have a dual fuel heat pump, which isn't that common, but it's readily available for multiple manufacturers. It's kind of a compromise where you have gas heating as the supplemental heating. But as far as heat pumps, either for residential or commercial, do people have thoughts aside from the costs and installation issues that were mentioned? Are there technical issues and barriers that exist, and how are we addressing those quickly enough?
This is Rob from Excel, and I'll speak on the res for the res piece of it. I think it's ready. If the proper amount of flight work is properly sized, and if there's sufficient consideration for what the heating need is going to be, I think it's for climate zone 4, climate zone 5, it's absolutely ready. Here in Minnesota, where it's climate zone 6, pushing it a little bit, but I think with due consideration, it's totally doable.
Also, to throw out, Excel is doing a really nice job supplementing training for heat pumps and other technologies out there. So we have that added resource.
Mm-hmm.
From an engineering design standpoint, it's a risk on the mechanical engineer to not have supplemental heating of one nature or another, because if you are not able to meet the demands of the building under the temperature conditions that come up, they're not going back to the code writers, they're going back to the engineers that designed the system. So
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't mean like there's, even if it's designed for 99% hours, I mean, there will be a need for backup heat. I don't want to misstate that, but you know, I think that if you look at it systemically, I still think it's doable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a lot of market availability for like split heat pumps for multifamily that have really low ambient that work well, but then other technologies not so much, like domestic hot water heaters. Those have much less availability for low ambient. And then also VTAX, you know, people want to do VTAX, PTAX. So there are options, but they're less market availability there.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and Shanti mentioned the comment online about availability of cold climate heat pumps down below -20 Fahrenheit. So yeah, that's good to know, because that's been, even in California, in the mountains, we have cold enough temperatures where it's a concern. And I would like to mention in regards to costs, and you know, there's the uncertainty of the heat pump costs sometimes with some contractors. You know, there is an opportunity, at least on some light commercial buildings, even if you're not going to an all-electric building, of having some cost savings due to the avoided costs of not having to run gas lines to the rooftop units. So having gas service to the building, but not to the roof potentially.
So I am going to shift the board over to this will you support question. It seems like we've kind of transitioned to that, speaking to heat pumps, and then also these other points here listed. We really would appreciate your feedback. You know, I don't know, Robbie, if you want to walk us through some of these couple of residential measures that we might be pushing for the next code cycle and get feedback, and then maybe we jump into commercial as well.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second to answer a question from the chat? Just kind of scaling back to talk about the goals for 2021 relative to the new building implementation plan, the net zero energy new building implementation plan. And Katrina, I welcome you to speak to this in a more quantified way. From a high level, what we're trying to do is address all 4 of the core facets of zero net energies as it's defined for Denver. So it's to increase the stringency of the codes relative to all 4 facets, and to move them forward on energy efficiency, renewables, electrification, and contribution to grid stability. And then if we can't push as hard on one as we need to, then we'll push harder on another. So it's a little bit fluid. So there isn't one defined statement that I can make relative to each one of those things, that this is what the goal defines we must do. However, again, Katrina, if you want to talk to the details of that plan that came from the CASR team, and I think you probably have a greater knowledge and understanding of specifics, we have been taking a holistic approach to it, saying, are we kind of on the path with the proposals that we have in hand? Are we above or below? And do we think we can kind of get there with all 4 combined? So that's kind of the extent of the definition that I'm able to offer. We could pull out the net zero energy new building implementation plan that the CASR team created and speak greater to the specifics, but I don't have that in front of me right now to reference.
So Christy, I did just pull up the commercial trajectory, and I can show the residential as well, just as a general idea of what we're considering for the next code cycles. The 2021 code is looking at this column, and the DGC is looking at the 2024 for reference.
Thank you, Erica.
So this is the commercial. I've had that on the screen for a little bit, and I can definitely go back or I can send a link in the group, and these are in pages 37 to 40, I believe. This is the residential trajectory. So I'll post this link in the group so you all have it. Ooh. Reference. There we go.
So I'll jump in here and ask a couple questions with regards to the trajectory. So we see that the trajectory is largely being quantified using an energy rating index. And as we get closer to achieving the 2030 goal, the thought process is that a performance pathway for code compliance is really the best pathway to be able to determine if a residential structure is able to, if we're able to meet that end goal in 2030. So the thought is that the 2021 cycle is probably too soon to move only to a performance-based pathway, compliance pathway. So, but that we could streamline the so that means that we would have to have both a prescriptive pathway and a performance pathway in the 2021 cycle, with the potential of dropping the prescriptive pathway in the 2024. Doing that would give us better flexibility, but we also need to create parity between the prescriptive path and the performance path. And if the performance path is based off of an ERI of 50 before solar is, then there needs to be some adjustment of the prescriptive path there. So my first question is, are people okay with doing a prescriptive and performance path in the 2021 and considering leaving behind the prescriptive path in the 2024? And then the second question would be, with the prescriptive path, narrowing the prescriptive path to just the R value table rather than the current, there are basically 4 options in the prescriptive path that one could use, and narrowing the performance path to just the ERI pathway. So again, the question is, do people support that type of proposal?
And Robbie, you're just talking residential.
Yes, just on the residential side.
And maybe to fuel that question a little bit, I would ask, what would stand in the way of us doing that? Because that would really help us to advance the performance of projects, but can teams achieve that? Is there going to be some sort of process shift that is untenable for the community? Does the community need support in order to get through that? What does everybody think? Because we would love to just think that it's viable and that if we just implement it, everyone will follow. But how painful will that be?
And this really relates to the simplification of the code. If we can cut down on the amount of options to simplify it and create less of a complex code, does that then increase compliance and understanding of what is actually happening, or what needs to be achieved within the code?
Robbie, I guess I'll speak to that a little bit. This is Nate with Taylor Morrison. I think limiting the amount of pathways in the energy code kind of restricts the options that the builders are given. So leaving the pathways that are existing in the IECC gives us, those options. We're seeing that as the code changes, different paths are, they're just better for the customer at the end of the day. And that's what we're trying to provide. There was a comment earlier about developers just absorbing these costs. And what we have to understand is that at the end of the day, buyers are buying these products. Customers, homeowners are moving into these homes, and trying to provide an affordable home in Denver just gets to be more of a challenge as these types of programs are put into a place. So just like the group to kind of think of that, because it's easy to think, oh, just put solar on, just do this, just do that. But at the end of the day, it's thousands of dollars that somebody has to pay for. And that thousands of dollars comes out of somebody's pocket that, maybe they have to rent a little bit longer. They don't afford a house. So, just have to think of the big picture, I guess, when we're looking at all this.
So Nate, I have a question for you with regards to the ability to trade off and have flexibility in how you're specifying the features that go into a home. Would the ERI pathway not be the most flexible pathway to be able to say, hit this score, but you can hit it any way you want to. You can use whatever specifications, you can figure out the most cost-effective way to do that. The prescriptive paths really are telling you thou shalt do something, except for the res check and that's the only trade-off path, but that trade-off path is not as flexible as a true performance path. So I guess I'm just pushing back a little bit to try to understand how moving to a reduced prescriptive path and a broader single performance path reduces flexibility.
I think in our most recent community, we looked at all alternatives, and the VUA compliance path was actually an alternative that we looked at quite closely to try and meet the new requirements in a certain municipality. And it gives flexibility, right? So if you're being restrictive on the ERI path alone, I suppose what you're saying is that the bar would be raised across all paths. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm ultimately saying is that, yes, you're going to have to increase the bar of the prescriptive paths in order to have parity with the performance path, because the performance path is going to follow the trajectory goal. And you want, ultimately, from a code perspective, you want every path to have a common starting point, have flexibility to achieve that common endpoint there. But the endpoint should be, the same. The compliance pathways just give you flexibility on how to achieve that endpoint. Right now, the multiple compliance pathways, there's not parity between them.
Yeah, so to pick up on that on the commercial side, that historically the prescriptive path is not a single path. You can put in any number of different types of lighting system approaches, HVAC systems, and envelope pretty different wall types, et cetera. So you're left with not really a full performance standard as part of the prescriptive requirements. So one of the things we've done, and it's one of the things, this is indirectly tied, is not really advancing the stringency of the code, but put in a mandatory minimum insulation requirement. That's one thing we're recommending. So it's a backstop that basically limits your ability to trade off insulation performance, for example, for other efficiency measures when using the performance approach, given that the envelope is typically the most resilient or longest lasting part of the structure, and it's incredibly difficult in some cases to retrofit the building envelope once it's been built and occupied. So that's one thing we're doing or recommending for non-res. The other thing is related to this UA is, and this wouldn't be an increase in stringency, but it would also be a potential restriction, is there's an envelope trade-off option for commercial available, and I'm recommending that be removed unless there's a compelling reason that it be kept in for similar reasons, that we don't want people to trade off envelope efficiency for things, that and things that can have lasting value in the building. And given that there's already a performance approach available for commercial, there's not really a significant reason to retain that envelope trade-off approach.
There's a really good question in the chat here that I think might be suitable for Robbie. And it is, are we operating on the assumption that the performance paths result in a better home, or do we have data supporting the elimination of a path? Or are we just wanting to kill a path to avoid having to create parity in two different approaches?
I'll take the second question first, I guess, is that regardless of what we do, that we need to figure out how to create parity between the different approaches in order to meet the ultimate goal there. But there is, I guess, limited data with regards to demonstrating that the performance approaches do achieve better buildings out there. Ultimately, I think because more verification, more testing, more and in some cases more consulting is occurring in those houses there. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question. Okay, well, I'll throw out another question with regards to the middle question. It says, are supports needed to eliminate barriers, supports that the city can provide? I'm wondering if people have specific suggestions of what types of supports the city can provide. Because to me, it seems like that comes outside of the code development process. I know right now the city is offering a small permit fee reduction if an energy rater is used on the residential side. So that's one type of support. I don't know if that will continue or not, but we need some examples and ideas of specific supports that the city might be able to provide, with the knowledge that the city doesn't have funds specifically for doing support. So how can we offer supports that aren't super costly?
And I would definitely take that one step further to suggest that there's going to be we're definitely interested in hearing about supports that aren't necessarily just, financial, to your earlier point, probably, but we have talked about some incentives on things, and we have some pilot programs that offer support from a timing perspective, from an expedited review perspective. So those are a couple of, tangible items, but I'm definitely interested in hearing ideas outside of those as well.
And I think I might layer on to that, we're hearing training and education being as super important, and the city can certainly consider engaging in that. But where can the development community also engage in that? How can this be a partnership moving forward? So first, it's just identifying what's needed so that we can get past the barriers, and then it's determining what falls into the city's court, what's outside the city's court. A lot of the potential for success rests outside of just advancing code provisions. And that's what we're asking for input on, so that those other things can be identified, and then the city can take a look at it and say, I don't know, maybe this can come from some sort of city funding versus maybe this can't. So what does the community need to be doing also in order to meet halfway? But it's just trying to get an understanding of those factors.
Right. Yeah, I think a couple of ideas have been mentioned, and these aren't the whole solution, but case studies of leading edge projects or underutilized systems or approaches, technical briefs, possibly where warranted, kind of brief online or in-person training sessions. Those can all be effective. And I think something like a case study, won't have obviously an immediate impact, but if somebody, enough people see, case studies of, say, cold climate heat pumps, for example, then it starts to get the wheels turning to get more, more installations of these types of systems.
If there's anything that the city can do to save the effort on the design team's side, such as an generic analysis perhaps of different systems, so that as much energy modeling isn't necessary, or as much analysis of the different systems won't be required to be repeated for each individual building, that might help reduce some of the upfront costs to make it more palatable.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to, to provide something and have people draw too many conclusions as far as how much better one system would be versus another, since it's certainly going to be system dependent. I think one thing that could be done, may already be explored, I'm not sure, is to basically to develop some prototype models that show working examples of these types of technologies, some energy models, such that it'd be kind of a template, if you will, that could aid in design and rollout of these types of systems.
That's what I meant. You said it better than I did.
No, well, no, you said it's fine. I was just clarifying or giving my spin. Christy, how are we doing on time? It looks like we have at least one more major question to ask.
Yeah, we've still got about 50 minutes within this session.
Okay.
So we're good, John. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Then I wanted to ask on the one leading title, residential prescriptive R value. There's something in there since we were talking about compliance options and paths. I guess the last two, the Appendix G baseline. This was a recommendation Oresco had to, for basically any systems or buildings going the performance approach, is to use the 9.1 Appendix G baseline as the basis for performance. So it doesn't go nearly as far as having a fixed EUI target, but what it does is it creates a more stable or static baseline to compare your building against, such that if you change something in your design for your proposed model, it doesn't automatically revise and change the baseline up and down. The baseline stays consistent. The second thing was regards to a prescriptive of path and also the green code is what people thought of basically using, without getting into the details of the measures, which we can, adjusting basically the credit point targets as a way to increase efficiency for commercial buildings. So for example, giving potential credits for much higher efficiency, cooling efficiency and heating efficiency HVAC equipment, or giving credit for example, reduced overhead office lighting with task lighting and similar measures. So what is the group's thoughts on using the Appendix G as a performance baseline? Is it appropriate? Is it too restrictive?
I will say that we've had major issues with Appendix G PCI calc. In Boulder and for LEED, I can't figure out where those percent savings are coming from when you're just using the 2007 lighting power densities and envelope and all those other prescriptive things. I mean, if you take 55% as that, well, I'm forgetting from the top of my head, but 45% savings from the non-plug loads, and then add another 30% or 20% onto that for code, there's nowhere to get your savings. It's impossible not to mention the fact that it's a gas baseline for Denver, which is completely against what the city's trying to do. So it incentivizes gas. We've just really struggled with PCI, and it does not seem like it is going towards the goals that the city has or aligns with those goals. And there's too much savings. You can't figure out how to get there without major PV systems. Other people that have experience, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but that's definitely been our experience.
And Sean, not to call you out here, but I'm going to call you out here to ask you if you have any thoughts on that, because you helped us to consider some of our thresholds a few years ago, and if you have any thoughts, we would welcome it, because this is a little bit beyond expertise that I personally carry at minimum.
I think Taylor identifies two issues, and I think one is how well ASHRAE is doing in actually calculating their targets for the latest editions of Appendix G. And I think raising some questions about that and whether the targets that are set in Appendix G are really reasonable. And that's one discussion. Then there's the reduction on top of those that would be required to meet Denver's goals. And I think that I think part of that is just that ASHRAE moved to this new PCI methodology, which is kind of confusing and it has a complex equation in it. So making sure that the market understands how to use that equation as ASHRAE intends it. ASHRAE is not real great always about explaining these things. And then also that Denver's goals are aggressive. And so meeting some of those goals is going to mean pushing pretty hard, especially in the green code. And moving, I think that it leaves the issue of the unregulated loads are really starting to get critical at that point. And so Denver does need to keep that in mind of how to address the unregulated loads in commercial buildings in Denver's target setting. If Denver sets its targets in a way that basically eliminates all loads but regulated loads, how are the projects going to meet that? So I think that it's in the green code, Denver does need to be very careful about that. I think where we are with the base code right now, it's still aggressive and it's still pushing hard, but I think we'll learn a lot from the projects that are coming through the 2019 right now.
Yeah, Sean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And just one more anecdote, like a couple projects we worked on in Boulder, they hit the EUI pathway, so a really aggressive EUI, and they weren't even close to the PCI. So again, we were just confused by that, you know, they were hitting like an EUI of 32 or mid 20s, but they weren't hitting the PCI. Now, again, Boulder has a harder PCI and 25% on top of that. I really think it's the 25% on top that causes issues. Because you're taking percent savings on top of percent savings, but just to reiterate, like it can get really challenging.
And I think that this ties back to the discussion that was had earlier about flexibility. And there's a danger of flexibility and a benefit to flexibility in the code. And you know, I think that recognizing that with modeling in particular, the metric that is chosen creates a whole bunch of issues all on its own. And so I think that however those proposals are thought through, they do need to think of the impact of the energy metric that's being used. So can there be a site energy approach through ASHRAE, which now there can be. You know, it was weird. There could be for a while, and then ASHRAE changed their methodology, and there couldn't be, and it looks like there can be again. You know, and how energy cost plays out, where you could use source energy, because all of these are going to have a very big impact on those percent savings, is what kind of energy you're looking at percent savings.
Yeah, thanks. That's good feedback. Yeah, I think my idea was I don't want an artificially stringent metric that's doesn't correspond to Denver's goals. Yeah, I agree that the site versus source is going to be a big issue. What is the larger group's thoughts as far as ways to address plug loads? You know, beyond kind of receptacle controls and Energy Star or Energy Star most efficient? Are there any kind of aggressive or unconventional ways to address that in code? Okay, well, the last topic on this title, as far as excuse me, credit point increases for high efficiency measures, basically adjusting those total point totals, for those familiar with it, for the ICC credits to calibrate the point totals by building type to align with Denver's goals. Does that seem like a reasonable approach to improve efficiency, as opposed to mandating specific things that might not apply to all buildings?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think there definitely needs to be some work and alignment on the prescriptive pathway. I think right now you can get a pretty non-efficient building through the prescriptive pathway. You know, performance pathway, especially for multifamily, is pretty much, you cannot get electric resistance through that pathway. You definitely can through prescriptive. So there's some items like that I think adding more into C406 could help mitigate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, related to plug loads, I think a question came up. I don't know the answer. Does the city or state have any jurisdiction to regulate plug loads?
The building performance standard that the city is considering right now is effectively a way to regulate plug loads. It regulates the way that a building is used. And post-construction operational regulations are probably the best way to get at plug loads, because A lot of what we see in accounting for plug loads in the energy code is you have to account for this much plug loads because the electrical code requires so many outlets. And so the electrical code is requiring a certain capacity of plug loads that have to be in the building for use. And so it's hard for the energy code to then reduce that. And that's why we see things like controlled receptacles as an attempt in the construction code to still allow the requirements of the electrical code to be met while hopefully reducing the effective plug loads in the building.
Right.
So that kind of folds into a separate but related question. That's ultimately where Denver is pointed, right? Towards outcome-based compliance as opposed to complying just during the design phase and then having some requirements during construction, and then what happens, happens. I guess I would ask the question, because we get mixed reactions on that from different people. What does this group think about outcome-based compliance, which is where we're headed? Like, what are the challenges? What are the challenges that you can see? We can see them. We can see some challenges from the city side and from an enforcement side and from a restructuring of our team side. And we can start to chip away at those. But what do you see from the private sector side as concerns that would need to be addressed? Because that is what the code is going to roll towards. And, obviously that would help us address plug loads. It would help us address a lot of things. But what are your thoughts on concerns related to that or opportunities related to that?
I think one concern would be timing and just how you figure out timing with that, doing Excel's EDA program and some measurement and verification on those buildings, especially commercial office, right? It might be a year and a half, even longer, 2 years at post-construction completion that the building's actually, over 80% occupied, TI has happened, et cetera, so that you could get a good energy use of the building. So just understanding that. And then I think, that whole trying to figure out, I think Energy Star does a pretty good job of putting in the percent occupied of the building in there, but I don't know if people actually pay attention to that and fill it out. But I think timing is a big challenge there.
I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to people being limited on how they can operate their own building or live their own life within their homes. I think that people will feel that's an encroachment on their freedoms in some respects, either with regards to what they need to do for their particular company or how they want to be in their house.
Yeah, I think that there's a pretty big difference between outcome-based compliance for a commercial building versus a residential building. And I think as we see more studies being done, that the ERI score is showing to be a good predictor of that outcome. And so if we use the ERI score for residential as the predictor for compliance and then get a confirmed ERI score at the end, we have a really pretty solid idea on the residential side that house has met the goal, which is really different than on the commercial side there.
Yeah, the commercial side, besides the challenges of buildings being occupied at stages or moving in and out and their own uses, there are a number of challenges to commercial occupancy as far as hours of operation and other things that make it a bit more of a challenge. So whatever your lines, whatever your actual operational things are that can be changed, on the fly, set points, et cetera, versus things that are more fixed. California had a kind of a preliminary asset rating program that didn't quite take off, but the idea with that is you could at least kind of see how the building's assets, meaning things that are in the building for a certain period of time, such as basically capital equipment, HVAC, lighting, in some cases controls, and see how the building's operating with kind of fixed operational assumptions, similar to what Energy Star does.
So I guess I have another question I could throw out before we move to the uncomfortable potential provisions, the last major category, is with regards to how best to take into account the efficiency of mechanical equipment, heating, cooling, and water heating in the prescriptive path of the code, because the prescriptive path of the code largely deals with envelope efficiencies, and we need to deal with both envelope efficiencies and mechanical efficiencies in order to meet our end goal for the 2021 cycle and then ultimately for the 2030 cycle. An idea thrown out that we create a point system similar to what's used in the commercial code to incentivize, I guess, higher efficiency equipment, mechanical equipment for heating, cooling, and water heating in residential buildings. And I wanted to see what this group thought about that idea.
And Robbie, do you maybe want to provide a little background about the conversation at the national level and some of the history of that idea? Because there has been some deliberation on it already.
Yeah, are you talking about federal preemption, I assume?
No, I actually was, I guess, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought this was proposed at the national level also, and there was some conversation around it. And maybe some concerns got raised, some advocacy got raised, and maybe some of that would be worth consideration by this group too.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not aware of that, or I don't remember at the code hearing that happening. So it probably did. It didn't go through. If it did, it wasn't adopted, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like the reasons why it wasn't adopted didn't necessarily tie to its direct functionality. So there was another dialogue that happened. There were a couple layers of dialogue that maybe lean towards the political versus the actual logistics. And I'm interested in the actual logistics for Denver's sake.
Great. Okay, I'll have to research that.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot on it.
No,
I
that's
just
fine.
thought you might
Hopefully,
know.
maybe somebody like Sean's on the phone who might know more about that.
Yeah, this isn't sounding familiar to me, but I didn't track every single proposal that went through.
Okay, well, I'll research it. That's a great thing to do.
But then otherwise, why wouldn't it make sense? It made sense on the commercial side. And to me, in my simple frog brain, I'm like, why wouldn't we do that on the residential side? Are there concerns about that? Because to me, I'd love to see it pursued.
So I had to go to jury duty yesterday, and the judge said, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." So proposals will move forward if people don't say anything.
You know, Robbie, I think that's a really good point. I mean, the idea of these working groups just in general is to engage as much participation as we can. And we really appreciate everyone taking the time and offering their insights throughout these meetings. So, but we do have, you know, the city has a code adoption to work through this year, and we have goals that we're all striving for. And we're hoping that this engagement can help guide that, you know, but lacking some feedback, we'll still have to make some of these decisions, you know, going forward from a formal amendment adoption process. So again, just really love and encourage the participation to help us, you know, better formulate an approach with this stuff. And I see Linda just posted in the text. I think I've heard from 3, if not 4, different people about concerns, I think, with Appendix G. So to me, that seems like some you know, pretty important feedback in terms of the feasibility of that. Definitely appreciate folks commenting and speaking on that. Nick, this is to you. You're asking about the list of proposals. They are not formally posted on the website yet because they're still being drafted. So when all of the formal amendment proposals, or I should say, as the formal amendment proposals are being drafted, we'll work to get those posted on our website for everyone to review. That'll be coming a bit later on this month and obviously into July. So it won't be immediately, but it'll be in the near term. Should we go ahead and move on to the final category?
Yeah, I was just about to ask if there's no more comments, we can kind of move on to this last question here about what uncomfortable potential provisions to improve the project performance can we revisit to bring to the Denver Green Code that might be hard but not impossible, that can be presented as options in a voluntary code that contains multiple compliance pathways, multiple electives. I don't think there's not, if it's not achievable, maybe now, I think it's still something to throw out there because it could be achievable in the next code cycle. So we just kind of want to brainstorm with all of you, what other up and coming technologies or provisions have you seen in other codes that maybe the Denver Green Code should consider?
Yeah, so I'll throw out one question. This is not exactly an isolated technology, but you know, lighting always gets kind of looked at as a reasonable option because of the advancement in technology. But is there is it, like, generally speaking, is for commercial, is there a target lighting efficacy? You know, obviously that will vary by some luminaire type, but should that be pushed harder, or should we go? Where are the, I guess, where are the opportunities as far as do you see as far as lighting versus HVAC and envelope?
In the base code lighting LPDs, you can still meet most of them with fluorescent lighting in commercial. So there is definitely room to make the policy decision that LEDs are effectively required and modify those LPDs. On the residential side, in the base code, you can still meet that lamp efficacy, I believe, with compact fluorescence. But I think the Denver code last time I wrote this proposal, you'd think I'd remember, but I think we might have pushed into LED levels of performance in the lamp efficacy. There isn't a lamp efficacy in the commercial side, but that's because there's just such a greater diversity. Sometimes you just have these lights that are less efficient and you just allow them into the mix. So there's definitely room there. And that's only because lighting technology has been advancing so quickly. The codes have really relied on lighting efficiency for a lot of their performance gains in the last 20 years. So some of the lighting designers might feel picked on if you push harder there.
Right.
Well, I would say, this is Jeff with Gensler. I would say commercially, we're not specifying fluorescent light fixtures anymore. I don't think we've done that in years. And so I think the market has probably already made that shift, or should be making that shift if it hasn't already. And so I guess from a energy efficiency level of percent savings, that's helping us hit those percent savings targets. But so we're not picking up efficiencies in other equipment or systems or envelopes when we're looking at that lighting efficiency. And so by compressing that down to what is the minimum or what is kind of the average requirement for buildings, I think we're always hitting 75 or 0.75 commercially for lighting power density easily. And sometimes we get down to a half a watt. So that's kind of what we're seeing.
Hi, this is Carol. We are seeing exactly the same thing. I don't think I've seen a project install fluorescent lights in a very long time. And I think you're not going to be able to find as many savings, energy efficiency savings, by lowering your efficacy because they are already installing LED lighting. Just about every commercial project I've seen.
I think one of the things there, even though the market has moved, any project that's modeling is harvesting those lighting savings to be less, to meet the target, and they're not meeting it somewhere else. So at least from the performance standpoint, anyone using the performance path, reducing the lighting requirements does effectively still get you savings, because the buildings won't be able to use that kind of market advantage on lighting for total building efficiency anymore. They'll have to get that savings elsewhere in the building. In prescriptive, though, it would mean reasonably no additional savings.
Right.
But another thing to keep in mind is that the prescriptive path is used more often by projects that don't have the professionals on this call involved. It's an electrical contractor installing that light. It's not an engineer designing them or a lighting designer designing them. So there are a lot of projects out there that are still doing lower technologies in the prescriptive path that don't involve design professionals for their lighting systems.
Right.
What you say, I would think that they're installing whatever's on the approved plans. Is that not the case? Because if the engineer specifies LED lighting, shouldn't that be what's installed? It doesn't have a lighting designer, but an engineer specifying LED lights.
Well, no, I'm saying that under the current code, if it's prescriptive and you can get away with installing a fluorescent light, that an electrician can do a simple LPD calculation. So if there's not an actual engineer, because this is a smaller project, those are the ones where there is a higher chance that you would still be seeing fluorescent lighting installs. I don't know the specifics of the Denver market, so I won't make a claim about the Denver market. I'm just saying that it's more likely.
Right.
Daniel, you had a really interesting comment about relying on lighting, and in the comment in the chat to a substantial extent. I'm curious, this seems like it might be more of a one-off, but if not, and that trade-off is so great, I'm wondering if, maybe we look at putting a cap on that allowance. Maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit more, Daniel, on that particular project, or I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that and how that trade-off works.
So I'm not an expert with understanding the models fully, but for example, that building has an R20 roof insulation, which is significantly less than code. It had mass walls, some of them with R13 insulation, but a whole bunch of them not furred, not insulated, and they were required to comply as new construction. So this is a full model to meet, 2018 IECC as amended by the Denver Building Code, and they were still able to hit it. And I was looking at where they got, enough credit back to do that. And I think because it's a commercial building and they can take credit for a lot of parking, maybe some exterior, it's not a lot of the lighting, sorry, maybe some of the parking lighting, there was quite a bit of lighting in the project, and just not being an expert in understanding the modeling, but it looked to me that they were just getting a huge amount of credit for, under the lighting category to really offset what's was an adaptive reuse with a significant addition, and it's a civic building. I don't want to say whose building, but it was disappointing to me that they wouldn't put the insulation in that building, because that's what really is going to live with the building for a long time.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing.
And Daniel, I think one impact of that, right, is that we are, I'm not sure the building or how but just cost, right, energy costs. So if it's a gas heating system, the lighting savings are electric and cooling mostly, and the penalty for not having that insulation is gas. So you're getting like a 6-to-1 differential there in your energy cost savings. So that can be part of that, right, that it allows you to have a worse envelope because it's gas heating that's really cheap and it doesn't really penalize it that much. And I don't know if that was the case in that, but I know that can be part of that.
Right. I think that's probably accurate, is that they were looking at energy cost basis of design. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And that's how they were complying, or that project. Yeah. So then, allows for that flexibility that maybe the city doesn't want. I think that's always been an argument. I think it goes both ways. The envelope stays with the building for a really long time, but it can also be done not well. So if insulation isn't continuous, right, or not installed right, how much is it doing? And then lighting definitely changes, but it's also kind of like that guaranteed savings. So I think there's
on a different topic, just because I have the floor for a moment, an example where the envelope is not maintained. I was out yesterday on a block with lots of restaurants like the Tennyson, anyhow, so I was noticing a number of restaurants, quite a few, that had their fully openable facades, the roll-up garage door type facades on the restaurants, and they were fully open in 90+ degree weather. I can't imagine that doesn't affect the efficiency of the envelope, even if it was, designed to meet code.
I believe the 2021 code addressed that you have to interlock any operable window with the HVAC. I was scanning through it the other day, but if not, I think that's something that's a low-hanging fruit that would be pretty easy.
I think they did add that, Mike.
Yeah, that is in there, and it's in California too. So it's applicable to operable windows or roll-up doors for storage areas for warehouses, etc. I'm not sure how the restaurant community would take that. They want their interior guests comfortable, but that's kind of a separate issue.
Okay, that's good news.
Yeah. One fairly aggressive proposal I have, well, I actually mentioned it previously, was requiring a higher performance glazing, especially for buildings like office buildings and perhaps some retail where you have people in close proximity to the windows. And the thought was to make the performance align with basically a triple glazed window, but probably specify the requirement as a U factor. And if there's any thoughts on that, or if there's other, obviously on the cooling side, the solar gain is a big concern. So if there's any thoughts on innovative things to do as far as light shelves or other types of overhangs and other types of measures, that I think that could be considered. I'm not sure how to codify some of those, but.
And I think that goes back to Daniel's question, right? I think with the city's goals, do we care about energy cost or do we care about EUI and energy consumption, right? Because those are going to give you two very different glass specs in our climate. So yeah, looking at that like triple pane is going to really help that energy consumption. But looking at like a low SHGC is really going to help that energy cost for most buildings. So I think it plays back into that question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. And I think it does raise potential equity concerns if I don't know the exact rate structure in Denver, but if gas is cheaper for heating, is there going to be a operational cost burden on buildings and tenants using heat pumps, especially multifamily?
Well, it seems to me that if the goal of Denver is to eventually get to electrification, why are we still using gas as a baseline? It seems like that is probably the lowest hanging fruit. I bet if you just made electrification the baseline, I bet it moves your energy code, I don't know, a whole bunch, because all of a sudden a whole bunch of things get more economical to do.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, in California, the state is applying a second metric in addition to their proxy for energy cost, which accounts for source energy and source emissions. So both of those changes, as well as accounting for methane leaks, is making the electric-based heating much more attractive. So what we've done is we're setting a electric baseline where it makes sense to do so, and then also limiting the options in the prescriptive in some cases to require electric-based heating at least. I think there's some systems. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, John, this is Roger. I think it's not really the baseline; it's the metric. As long as you have an energy cost comparison between electric and gas heat, the gas heat's always going to win. And so you have to go to a different metric where they're more equivalent, and whatever that is, source energy or CO2 or something different from cost. Changing the baseline alone without changing the metric isn't really going to do much for you. It's just going to make your code less stringent, essentially.
Right.
So how does everybody feel about the thought of going to a baseline that's energy used based as opposed to looking at everything through the cost lens?
I think it misses some of your goal because you're still allowing gas in the equation. If your long-term goal is to get off of natural gas, then you got to do it at some point. And then just the question is when? Is it this code cycle, the next code cycle? I mean, buildings are getting built with natural gas that are going to be there for the next 50 years. So, when do you rip the Band-Aid off?
And
there is the element of, right now the Denver Energy Code has multiple metrics available. So it could be a matter of making a metric available and then making it required in the future, to make that transition. So it doesn't have to be a a sudden transition to a different metric like site. And there is the reality that under the site metric, if you use site energy with Appendix G, it not only makes it easier to do an all electric building because it's not based on cost, it actually disadvantages gas in the by using site energy. So just that transition to site without prohibiting gas has that impact on gas.
The other nice thing about that is, I remember in the last cycle talking about the skin and pressure testing buildings. And the thought was, okay, you start now and then you don't make it so stringent, but you get everybody used to it and then you move forward. If you start now, then in the next cycle you can adopt something where you do get rid of gas. At least you're telegraphing and getting people used to how it's gonna be.
And so I would say that the Denver building code currently, the 2019 codes currently have a couple of different options for how energy can be viewed, and some are through the cost lens, some are through the actual energy used lens. And we see very, very precious few projects that choose through the actual energy used lens, right? So we can offer these metrics, and it might allow everybody to get used to running the test, because I think it's pretty standard practice for teams to look at the modeled approach through all of the different options and see which one best serves the project. And at least that gains the familiarity. We will have to continue to monitor what's being selected, because that's where the resistance generally comes forward from. If we're seeing that one option is not being favored as opposed to all the others, then we know that when we look to take all the others away and bring everybody to that option, there's going to be a lot of discussion in the development community about doing that. But hopefully by then there'll be a greater understanding about how to navigate that other option. So it makes sense to start having the options there for everybody to consider at minimum.
Hopefully there'll also be a better understanding of how the Denver Green Code is being used as the precursor for the next cycle as well. I wanted to throw out one other uncomfortable, since we're talking about electrification, it is a very uncomfortable conversation on the residential side, going to electrification. The goal for the 2021 is to be all electric ready. And then in the 2024 to go to all electric. How are people feeling about that trajectory for the residential side?
Does all electric ready have anything in there about like fireplaces and miscellaneous things like that, like pools, other things like that?
Yes, it does.
Or it could.
So just out of curiosity, what is it for like a gas fireplace? Is there even can you do that electrically? Like, is that commercially available?
There are infrared and LED electric fireplaces available on the market. And it is interesting because the things that we are hearing about them from people who want gas fireplaces are the exact same things we heard from people when gas fireplaces entered the market that people said about wood fireplaces. So
I think maybe this ties.
Sorry, Christy. Yeah, I'll just speak to that quick. Just from my own cost comparison, I guess, that I did in my own house really quick was converting my gas furnace to electric. My utility bill would quadruple. It would be 4 times what I'm paying today to have an electric furnace. And I know that's not a heat pump, which some of you guys were talking about. And I don't know if the market's there yet to supply enough heat pumps to the market. They could get there eventually. But has that research been done to kind of see how that overall impact would impact, that impacts everybody, right?
It does, and I believe that the CASR team has been doing research related to that. We don't have anybody in this meeting today representing from their team to speak to this, so I apologize for that, but that is where that response would come from. So I can't speak to it, but it is my understanding that that's integral to the work that's being done.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good to understand is how that impacts the overall affordability of housing in Denver, because this is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Things
no,
that impact housing and housing availability, and you're making it less available in some cases. Robbie, could you also talk a little bit about the 50% requirement in the, I think you had a screenshot of it there just a little bit ago, of the minimum renewable offset? Can you speak to that?
The offset would be how much a PV system would offset your specific electric energy use in the house. So there's
Can be done by.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Robbie. That can be done by on-site renewables or buying into the community solar program.
I'm sorry, community what?
Solar program, which the details are still being defined for that. And we're going to be working with CASR to develop that more and understand it.
Okay, yeah, that would be good to understand is how that impacts, because in a lot of cases, and Robbie's familiar with it, and a lot of you guys on this call I'm sure are too, is a lot of houses aren't directly facing a certain direction where it makes sense to put solar on the roofs. Yeah, and I wonder what that renewable offset would be. And so that's going to be part of the proposal, or I guess this is out of Denver's NZE, isn't it? The net zero energy. Okay.
Yeah, this is the goal. And so we have to create a proposal to, in essence, codify that goal.
So we are at time today, but I do want to encourage, I'm going to leave this mural board open for the next 24 hours. I would encourage any additional input, especially on the renewables energy target, to be placed in here, since we didn't get to talk too thoroughly about it. And that is a pretty large step for us to take to align with Denver's goals. So with that, Eric, I'll let you wrap it up if you'd like. And again, thank you for everyone for attending and providing your feedback today.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica. And yes, just to reiterate, thank you everyone, not only for attending today, but of course for attending our first and second working group meetings. We very much value your participation and feedback in helping us direct how these codes will be drafted and ultimately written and implemented in the coming years. So just to give a real quick update on process, as Erica mentioned, we'll leave this mural board open for about 24 hours and invite you to add any additional comments or feedback that you might have. The next steps in our process are to draft formal code amendment proposals. And as I mentioned earlier, we will post those online on our 2021 building code adoption website. So you'll be able to find those. I'd say you could probably start looking there in about a couple of weeks out. We'll get those posted. And anyone can also currently formally submit a code amendment proposal if they'd like. The form is also now available on our website and has been for a week or so. So you're welcome to submit any proposals that you would like, and we'll consider those. And if they're, in appropriate format and fit the code appropriately, just from a presentation perspective, then we'll consider advancing those to the committee. The committee hearings will occur starting in August, and they'll run between 3 and 4 months. And we'll form formal code committees to hear all of these amendment proposals. So if you're interested in sitting on a committee, I would invite you to submit an application also on our webpage if you're interested there. So with that being said, again, thanks to everyone for participating. I really do appreciate it. We've got work to do internally, and then there will be again a public process on the code adoption hearings. So more to come on that. Please check back on our website frequently. And if you have any questions, let us know. You can always reach out through our website or feel free to email us directly. So with that, thank you again. Have a great day. And I guess I could say stay cool.